Hey everyone, I'm here with Stephen Tabakelis. He's the lead engineer for stormwater management at All County and Associates. If you're looking to install something to take care of water in your backyard, like a rain garden, he's the guy that's going to show up, take care of you, and make sure everything's done right. Stephen, thank you so much for coming out with us today.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. So I'm going to affectionately refer to you as the Rain Man going forward, just because I think it's hilarious. But before we dive in, you guys have put together two phenomenal PDFs. Like I was blown away when I had the first shot at looking at these things. They're great. One's
Thanks.
about stormwater management, and the other is about rain gardens specifically. Before we dive into them, tell me, what in the world is stormwater management, and why should I even care?
So the issue with stormwater management, I mean, anybody that's a homeowner, actually, really anybody that lives in a home has dealt with stormwater in the past. Obviously, when it rains, the rain has to go somewhere. There's a large quantity of the rain that isn't able to actually make it back into the ground, and that's where you see stormwater runoff occurring. And then if there's a large quantity of runoff, that's where you have issues with flooding. And then obviously flooding ends up in your basement if you're a homeowner, and that's where issues occur. So that's basically what it is. It rains, and if the rain isn't able to get soaked back into the ground, it becomes stormwater runoff. And when it becomes runoff, that's when we have to look at ways to manage and treat it.
So how serious of an issue is this though? Like I have some friends down in Philadelphia and they work in your field and they claimed, I guess their systems could only handle 1 inch of water. Is this like a real issue where we have like a lot of runoff that's, I don't know, polluting the water or destroying property?
Oh yes, it's a major issue as we build every year as things get built out more and more. And as you mentioned, in the city where they're only able to manage a single inch of runoff, out here, I personally live up in the Berks County area. We don't have as much of a runoff issue at the moment, but the reason for that is because any building that occurs where you go and you alter the surface of the land. The land right now could be lawn, it could be meadow, it could be woods. You go and you alter it and you create a parking lot or even a roof of a house and a driveway. There's going to be some quantity of runoff of additional runoff that would occur that would leave that site. So the key is to manage the extra runoff. If there is additional runoff that would make it into a stream, obviously, with it being a larger quantity, it creates a velocity issue. And then that's when you see issues with stream channels that would start to erode, just overall flooding problems. But yeah, the main key to stormwater is you manage it on site. When you go and you alter the cover of the soil now, you manage it where it right there at the source, so that therefore your neighbors would not have any issue and your streams wouldn't have any issue as things change with our land.
So when people come to me and they say, oh, they're building this brand new construction, they're ruining everything. I guess what you're saying is, according to current stormwater management, all the rainfall that should have existed on that lot or that large parcel should stay on that parcel. And that's why they do like those detention or retention ponds that we always see, like that one lot that's just a giant pit. They usually fence
Correct.
it.
Correct. Exactly. I mean, though, any of those builders, they're spending, all this extra money to hire engineers, to figure out the engineering calcs to make sure that we're not going to have any negative impacts. So that's the whole practice of that's the whole reason for the practice of stormwater and engineering, to make sure that they're not going to have any issue as again the land cover changes. But
And what's
yes, so that's the reason for the large basins that you say.
and that applies, like I guess as you were saying before, it protects both the homeowners that are going to be living in that community as well as the surrounding communities around. Is that also true?
Correct.
Okay. The
Yeah.
reason I bring that up is because I've had a number of clients who've come to me and they're like, hey, we've been living here 30 years or 50 years or whatever the time is. And they're like, oh yeah, a long time ago, this was a beautiful property, but when they built up the hill, now we have water that kind of like streams down into our property and makes a giant mess. Now, those aren't new builds like in the last 10, 20 years. I don't know when storm water management became like a thing, which I guess I'd be interested as a side note. But some of these stories like I've heard where they're saying, yeah, 20 years ago they built a community and ever since then we've been flooded. Is this like
Mm.
how long have they been paying attention to stormwater management? Let me ask that question.
So I don't know exactly how long. I can tell you that the standards have changed every year. It feels as if every year it just becomes more and more strict. I can tell you personally speaking. So I've been doing this now for about 15 years, and back when I first started, the focus was just looking at stormwater rate. We didn't care about the quantity. We just really cared about how quickly it would leave the site. So that therefore a neighbor downhill could kind of feel as if they're still being flooded out. So basically, we metered it out at a slower rate, but there would be a larger quantity of stormwater runoff. But in the last, maybe I want to say 8 to about 10 years, the focus isn't only on rate; it's also on the volume, also on the quantity of the stormwater. So now, and often too, actually, the stormwater ordinances, each township has their own ordinance. Oftentimes we have to make up for the sins of our past, where we actually overstore. We store more stormwater on site to actually, so after the shopping mall is built, if it's a shopping mall or a house, there actually could be less stormwater at a slower rate that leaves that site. So.
Is there a reason it's overbuilt? Are they like hedging their bets for like the system to decay over time, or?
So, and engineers always build with a factor of safety of 2. So that's just kind of how our field is. We always make sure that we overbuild everything. We just have to be safe because as a civil engineer that designs stormwater, if I go and I make a basin too small and it floods out a series of homes, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So we apply our science, our knowledge, and then we just put a factor of safety on 2 of it, or a factor of safety of 2 on it, and we just make sure it's extra big, and that kind of helps to make things safe. But again, we're kind of making up for the sins of the past, where in previous years and previous decades, they didn't have to manage stormwater. So we already have impacted our streams. We already have increased flooding issues. So now again, to kind of bring things back to where they should be, we're kind of over storing water. We're slowing down rates even further to kind of fix our previous errors.
It's really interesting. It's almost like it's a shock absorber for the world. And I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
speak in analogies all the time. I didn't say that before we
Sure.
started, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good point, because I could see exactly what you're saying. As much as you handle things on site, it doesn't change the fact that it's coming back into the streams or the rivers or the water table or something at some point. And you're basically saying, well, you know what? Even if the other places are overloaded, if we can absorb some here, so we're not burdening the existing systems or trying to get us back to where we were before we built up the entire community. Because I know that in our area, there's a big criticism for that. There are a lot of people who feel like we're taking the beautiful woods of Pennsylvania and converting them into suburbia, which is true in many sense. But that's why we have like open space requirements for new construction. That's why we have the stormwater management that you're referencing. Does it fix it? No, we're just adapting with the times, I guess.
Exactly.
Which doesn't help the people who want to preserve the land, but we also have conservation, open land. I'm digressing. Let's get into the first PDF. The first one that I wanted to focus on was the one that was actually stormwater management. That's the title. And like I said, I'll have links to all these. So anyone who wants to download them, they're more than welcome to. We talked a little bit about why it's important, but you keep referencing these BPMs, or these best management practices. Can you fill me in a little bit about that? Like, what exactly are we looking for here? Are you just saying sloping ground away from the house is not good enough for stormwater management? We need to add an extra layer. Tell me about those layers.
Yeah, so BMP, or best management practice. It could be a series of things. It could either be a rain garden, which I know we're planning to talk about a little bit more later. It could be a seepage bed, a recharge pit, a trench. a swale type system, or a large scale basin as well. So again, these are just standard names that we give these features, and they're pretty common here in PA. Other states have other BMPs, but the ones that I mentioned are the most common here in PA. And yeah, I mean that's what's used. Again, that's what us engineers have as in our toolbox to be looking to manage the additional stormwater.
All right. So then are certain tools appropriate for certain situations? Like I should be thinking rain garden when I have this problem. I should be thinking, and I apologize, I didn't remember everything you said, erosion bed or something like that in another. Can we highlight a
Yeah,
couple of those? Like
yeah.
number one
So
problem people say to me is my backyard's wet. What do I do? Is there a tool for that? What is it?
yeah. So if you're just a single homeowner with just an issue in a backyard, you probably would be looking at doing a rain garden in the backyard. The reason that we would choose a rain garden over like a seepage bed, which I mentioned too. So a seepage bed is an underground storage unit essentially. It's you would dig a big hole in the ground, and you would fill it with stone, and the stone has like a void space. A portion of it's stone, but a portion of it would be air, and it would hold a quantity or hold a portion of stormwater. But if you already have a wet backyard, that probably means the soils below the surface are also wet. So if you go and you dig a hole and you fill it up with stone and create that void space, that open area, it's going to be a sponge. It's actually would attract any of the stormwater to it, and that the whole system would just be filled up with water. So to answer your exact example, we probably would be doing a rain garden in that area, and a rain garden sort of operates like a basin where you would make a small pit in your backyard, but as opposed to filling up with stone, you fill it up with a nice soil, a nice planting soil, and you actually would stick plants in it. The plants would help to actually drink up the water. The soil would be like a sand soil mix, so it actually has a void space as well. So there's some storage in the soil. But the key is that you're getting the right type of plants into the rain garden. And so obviously the soil isn't doing its job, and it isn't able to percolate or infiltrate the water back into the soil. So you're actually using a secondary, which would be the plantings that would help to actually drink up the water. So again, each BMP has its own specific use. But it just happens to be the use that you mentioned would definitely be most applicable for a rain garden.
So let me say that a little bit different to make sure I'm clear. So the seepage pit is fundamentally just a giant cup in the backyard. Once you fill it up, it's done. It doesn't do anything else. But the rain garden specifically, it has that same cup capacity, but by putting plants in, it's actually absorbing water and trying to use the water and dissipate the water more rapidly.
So
Like per volume, is like the rain garden better because it's sand and soil versus stone, or does the rain garden only work better because it has a whole bunch of vegetation? They literally, like I think I heard once, like a tree, I don't know how many gallons of water it drinks in a day.
yeah. So seepage bed. A seepage bed can really only be used if it has the right type of soil. So if the soil is actually a very well drained dry soil, that would be when a seepage bed is used, again, because you're just going to dig a big pit. You're going to fill it up with stone. You're going to push all the stormwater into the stone pit, and the stormwater actually has to then infiltrate back into the soil. So if the soil is a very well drained soil, that's when you would use a seepage pit. If it isn't, as you mentioned in your example, that there's a backyard and it's wet, obviously the soil isn't a deep, well drained soil. That's when you would use a rain garden, because you can't rely on the soils to be doing all the work, actually infiltrating stormwater. So that's when you're adding a secondary component, which would be the plantings. and that's what also would aid in helping to get rid of a ponded area. So that's basically the difference. They're both supposed to infiltrate stormwater into the ground, but when the soil is not a well drained soil, that's when it needs kind of like a little bit of help, and that's when
Yeah.
you would specify the plantings as well.
Yeah, so it's like a transplant. I'm transplanting, good soil into a place that's bad soil, whether there's too much clay or slate or I remember I was out with, I think Roger one time, and he was like, "Yeah, this is basically just a giant slab of granite up here." And I was like, "Well, that explains why it's not draining." Um,
Yes.
do you have recommendations if we think the water's coming from the neighbor's property? Because I've also seen that where you look around and you say, "Well, the soil seems fine, but it's just a giant funnel coming down to my property." What should we be doing then?
So that's a tough one. I would say if it's possible, you probably would not be looking to manage other people's stormwater. If you just happen to live in a valley, at that point you probably would be looking at doing a swale. A swale would actually you're going to just tell the stormwater where to go. As of right now, if it all collects in ponds on your property, if you're able to create a swale and move the storm water along, that's probably your best bet. The only issue there is you have to be careful as to where you push it. So two wrongs do not make a right, obviously. So if other people are draining their stormwater onto your property, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to do exactly the same and then make it the next person's issue. So I can't say that a swale is the end all be all there, but to me it sounds like if you're able to move the stormwater along, because I'm sure when those properties, when your neighbors' properties were built, the intention wasn't to dump all the stormwater onto to your property. So if you're able to figure out how the stormwater should be going, as an example, if there's a storm inlet there, or that's nearby, storm sewer like in the street, if you're able to take that ponded area and you just put a swale in, and you're able to route the stormwater into the storm inlet as was originally intended, that would be the best use of that.
Okay. And so just in case anyone doesn't know, a swale is basically just like a little hump in the dirt because, I mean, I don't know what percentage of water just runs off the surface, but it's my understanding it's the vast majority. So the theory is when it's rolling down the hill towards your property, you put a little swale because then it catches it and it funnels it towards, like you're saying, the storm water or wherever it's supposed to be going. Is that also the scenario where people are talking about laying like perforated pipes underground to try and collect that water and funnel it? I hear a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah, so you're talking about an under drain. So yeah, I mean, oftentimes they install under drains under swales. So again, the swale will act to capture the stormwater. And if you did put nicer soil above the under drain, it would allow the stormwater to make it down into the under drain. And again, based on the soils on the site, if they are able to drain, the under drain would then capture the storm water. It would spread it out over a certain area, and there's a possibility that you could actually infiltrate the storm water back into the ground at that point.
And the beauty of all this is I don't have to understand any of the soil science, is what you're saying as well. Because you come out to my house and you'll dig it up and tell me if it's clay or whatever. And I just reference clay because there's a lot of it in the area, and that operates very differently from like tillable soil. Like when I go out with a farmer and they're looking at land and they're like, "Wow, this is great for crops." I'm like, "Yeah, that's not exactly commonplace." If you think your ground is like 10 inches worth of good soil, start digging around. You're going to find a lot of properties are not.
Yes,
there's a lot of garbage stuff around in the area, unfortunately.
Yeah. So actually, prior to us, actually specifying a certain type of stormwater BMP on your site, whether it's a seepage bed or a rain garden. We start out by first doing a soil probe, is what they call it, where we actually probe into the ground and we figure out what the soil structure actually is, because we can't just go and assume that a recharge pit or a seepage bed would work, and then after they go and install it, the thing just would become a sponge. So yeah, so that's basically our starting point. We start out by looking at the soil first. The soil will be what shows us what type of system is best suited, and that's really how the process goes.
And is that what you were describing in the rain garden form? Because I saw you said, oh, you dig, I think it's 12 inches deep and 6 to 10 inches around. You fill it with water, you let it drain, and I think you fill it again. Is that what you're referencing? Because that's looking at, like you're talking about the quality of the soil, how well it absorbs it. Because we need to
Yes.
know if the water's going anywhere, if it's going horizontally, if it's going down, because it could literally go any which direction. You have no
Yes.
idea until you actually see the property.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's basically it. So after we look at the actual the makeup or the structure of the soil, we then we'll do testing. It's like it's like a perk test where you actually pour water into the soil, and from that you can figure out how quickly the water is able to actually infiltrate back into the ground. So we as engineers, after we look at the soil, we figure out the rate that the water is able to get back into the ground. We use that data, and then we can then size it. So if it's a very good soil that the water is able to infiltrate or percolate back in the ground very quickly, it would shrink the size of the seepage bed or the rain garden down. So again, based on the infiltration rate is what they call it. So how good the soil is able to get the water back in the ground. That's what we use to then either grow or shrink the system.
Gotcha. Yeah. So with septic systems, you want to stay above the water table. And here you're saying, how quickly does it go down to the water table? If I understand. When you're talking about perk tests.
Actually, no. Actually,
I
no.
said that backwards.
I was gonna say it is exactly the same thing. So with a septic bed or an absorption bed in a you would want to make sure that the water is able to actually to drain down as well. So it's
Right.
exactly the same deal. So whether it's stormwater or septic, it's almost exactly the same test. We're just seeing at what rate the water is able to move through and down in the soil.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to just start when people ask me about it and they're saying, well, what am I doing with water? I'm going to say, well, just imagine we have a new sand mound, or imagine we have a new in-ground system, but it's not designed for your sewer water. It's now designed to handle the excess rainwater. Get it going
Yes.
somewhere. And this one we can put giant plants in because you're not going to break it because it's sand and soil if it's a rain garden, right? Like I could plant a tree in a rain garden if I felt like it. But that's
Yes.
not, if I remember correctly, that's not what you guys recommend. So I do want to get to that. Let me just ask one more thing since I'm bringing up the tree thing. Can I just plant 10 trees if my backyard's wet? If I plant 10 trees, does this all go away, or do I actually need a rain garden?
You could plant trees. You just have to make sure that you're planting the right type of tree. So obviously it depends on what type. Some trees like very wet soils, other trees don't. So the key there is to plant the right type of tree. And yes, each tree would help to actually uptake some of the water.
And I know you're not like a plant expert, or at least I don't think you're a plant expert. Do
No,
you
I'm
know what
not.
kind of tree that would be? Because you're right. As you're saying it, I'm thinking like, you know what? A lot of trees can't survive when they're just sitting in like a pool of water. You're going to
Right.
kill it.
Correct. Yeah.
You know, the soils need to
Yeah.
breathe too. They can't, that's why they don't live in swamps. You don't see a
Right.
maple down in a swamp. So maybe
Yeah.
that's a bad idea.
Yeah, I would say so. Oftentimes, you would plant birch tree, willow tree. It could be a black willow, a red maple. So there are plants. There are plants. I really have a list. That's basically how I look at it. It depends on, again, I mean, some plants do very well in a wet zone. In fact, if you look at the rain garden PDF that we made, and to be honest with you, I'm using that right now as my cheat sheet when I'm calling out the plants. There's a zone 1, a zone 2, and a zone 3. So
Okay.
the zone 1, as listed on our PDF, those are basically that would be the most wet area. So we call out shrubs, perennials, and trees that would work in the most wet area. So if you're looking to plant trees, you could really take any trees off of that list. And then so that was a zone 1. Then we have a zone 2, which would be a little bit more dry. So that would be a moderately wet area. Again, we list the plantings there, and then finally there's a zone 3, which would be a drier area, and we list the plantings for that as well. But again, it's key. So you wouldn't want to go in your backyard and go planting a certain type of tree that would not be able to handle the wet soil if your intention is to help alleviate the ponding issue.
Correct. And I appreciate you referencing back to that document, because I do remember seeing the different zones, and then you guys threw in a bunch of pictures showing like how these gardens often look. They basically look like garden beds, like fancy landscaping. Like, oh, I made my property look beautiful, instead of I'm worried about the stormwater management. So that's a really good point, and more reason why everyone should just download it and take a closer look at it, because it does have very good content in there. So duly noted. Don't expect, if you have serious problems with water in your backyard, don't think that just planting a couple trees is going to make it go away. This is a much more effective solution. Okay, great. So how I'm gonna jump into some other line of thought. You know what? I'm just gonna ask it. So I did have somebody say, when I'm doing my stormwater management, does it make sense for me to funnel it into my sump pit, or to actually send it back outside, like to a rain garden or something? Do you have an opinion on that?
You would not want to funnel anything into a sump pit. I mean, you would want to keep the water away from your house as much as possible. And in fact, if you look at the way your house should be graded, that means well, when I say graded, that means how your land is sloped. It should be sloped away from the house. So you would not ever want to kind of funnel the water towards the foundation, and then from there have it hit the sump pump. So that means it's getting into the actual basement of the house, only to then be pumped back out. You would want to handle everything, and actually, to be honest with you, this is a challenge that us stormwater engineers always face. Is we have to get the stormwater to the facility via gravity, meaning that we do not pump it. Stormwater isn't ever pumped. And if you stop and think about it, it makes sense, because when you need the stormwater, the facility the most, it's probably during a large storm. Mm-hmm. And that's that situation is highly likely that you could potentially lose power. So the key is that you do not want to. I assume the reason for the question was that they wanted to put a pump to it, to be able to pump the stormwater to a facility. And the answer is no. If I ever tried to put that on a plan, there's no way a township would ever approve of that. So it must be like a code issue, but you wouldn't ever put stormwater in your house to only be pumped back out of your house.
So yeah, and I don't know the specific scenario. I do know that there is water at the property that they were referencing. But yeah, I see people do like French drains and things on the inside. Your sump pumps to get the water out. It's not supposed to be your primary solution if you have a water issue on the outside. The water that's outside should stay outside, because that's where you want it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense. I had an inspector once describe it. He said, a basement's basically a swimming pool, but the last thing you want in it is water. So don't put any in. Do everything you can to keep it out.
Exactly.
I thought that was interesting. All right. So let's say I've got a wet backyard. I see some information here about sizing systems. Is there any like rule of thumb that we can use to say like, hey, this is how we should size it? I know you have like a whole graph here and an explanation saying if you wanted to size it and it's like a quarter or a third of the roof. Do I know how big it needs to be based on like how wet my backyard is? Or are we just speculating now and you can do the actual calculation when we're there?
Exactly. So we do show just a very simplified calculation. In fact, our calc shows I think we're looking at storing about two inches of rain. So if you're looking to pick up, say, a certain downspout, off of your roof. If you know the square footage of the roof, we're calling out really that it's the minimum size of the garden. We're basically providing you the calculations to calculate what the minimum size should be. And again, that's really a 2-inch storm. The reason we choose 2 inches because that's a very common large storm. Obviously, you could get these massive storms. We had a couple last summer that were, astronomically higher. But your standard large storm would generate two inches of runoff. So that therefore, if you know the square footage of roof, how many inches. Like we recommend the 2 inches. We provide you with the calculations to figure out how many cubic foot of storage you should have in the actual rain garden. And then we walk you through the next step. If you wanted to do this entirely on your own, we walk you through the next step of actually how to size the rain garden based on the drainage area that would be running to it.
And the same principles apply if we're talking about like land. And I'm going to use my property for argument because I've got a nice grade away from my house. It just kind of slopes down. But then when you follow the backyard, it slopes into a kind of level spot. During a heavy storm, that level spot can get soggy. So hypothetically, you and I could stand out there, measure the space of there, and then maybe you do some math for calculating the land up higher or something like that. And we could set up a rain garden that would help reduce the chance of that land being soggy in the future. So the kids could run through it after a rainstorm without ripping up the grass, for example.
Yeah, right, yes.
Same principles. Your example was just a roof because, I don't know, maybe you're doing an addition on the house or, that, like you said, that one gutter results in one wet spot in the one corner of my property. I thought it's a good example. The more I talk about it, the more I appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, also too, I wanted to point out our PDF gives you just general guidelines for actually sizing it. When you're actually building something on your property, you're going to have to obtain permits. You probably would fall under the township's stormwater ordinance. That's when you would definitely be looking to call an engineer like ourselves, because the very simple calculation we gave you for sizing the rain garden probably would not be the same or at least not exactly the same as what the actual ordinance states. So again, this is just a general guideline. If you already have an existing home and you just want a little bit of benefit with capturing the runoff and to add like some nice aesthetics in your yard, and you want to do a rain garden on your own. But absolutely, if you're looking to build a home or an addition or a driveway extension, and you're going to be filing for a township permit, that's when you would probably fall under a stormwater ordinance. And everything in the PDF would not really apply. You would be looking at hiring an engineer to actually do the actual calculations per the township stormwater ordinance.
Right, and I think that's a great cautionary note. Please, with everyone, you have to talk to your zoning officer to make sure everything you're doing is up to code. Don't go and install something just to find out later you didn't do it the right way or it wasn't permitted. And we can't make statements about every township, but you're basically saying like, look, if I want to solve my wet backyard, I probably can do the rain garden myself, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
But if I want to put on another bedroom and an addition, I certainly can't. I definitely need to talk to the zoning officer. Because if I'm doing my backyard, it's basically, I'm building a garden that happens to collect rainwater.
Right.
So
yes,
that's why we call Stephen people.
Yes, exactly.
I watched a video once about how to do knee surgery. It doesn't mean I was going to do the knee surgery for my wife. You watched a video with Stephen talking and looked at a PDF. It doesn't make you a soil expert. Okay, that's good. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight about like the construction? I know you did a really interesting job and you had pictures in there, how you show you like dig it out first and then what you lay first, what you lay second. Is there anything you wanted to highlight or elaborate on before then? Like I know you referenced call 811 before you dig because you don't want to hit like electrical lines or cable lines or anything like that.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. As you mentioned, obviously it's important to do PA one call first. You want to make sure that there isn't anything buried in that area. Other than that, so after you run through our calcs and you figure out what size you need, you would actually over excavate a little bit. I think we recommended a foot of over excavation, which just gives you the space to allow you to come back and put a nicer soil back into it. So we recommend not putting back the same soil, but actually putting a soil blend in. It could be a topsoil sand mix. Oftentimes you add compost into it. Oftentimes, if you look at my plans, I do a third of each. So it'd be a third compost, a third sand, a third topsoil. You would want to make sure, so you could be using the topsoil on your site, but you want to make sure that's not a very clayey type soil. So you wouldn't want a high clay. And again, that's going to provide the proper soil to allow the rainwater to be absorbed into the soil, and that then hopefully aid in it infiltrating back into the actual ground. But it's also a good planting soil as well. So it's going to help the plants grow too. Other than that, I think that was really it. So the key is you want to have you want to make sure that you amend the soils, and you amend it with the right type of soil in the system. The soil is key, and the actual plants are key too. Those are the two things you really have to pay attention to.
And that's what you have the list of. It lists all the different shrubs. I see perennials, I see trees in this
Right.
PDF that say like, hey, these are great things to plant here. And it doesn't mean you can't plant other things, but these are things that you know that work in our climate, specifically
Yes.
Pennsylvania. So if we're out in, another state, it might not be the same stuff.
Correct.
And then after this, when it's all installed and it's all done, it's basically a garden bed. So every year, in terms of, like, I know you had a little bit about maintenance that you referenced. I maintain it like I maintain a garden. So maybe I'm mulching it once a year,
Mulching it.
picking
Mhm.
weeds. If I let it get
Yeah.
into disarray, does it still work? It just looks ugly.
Yeah. It would.
I like that. In case I don't feel like going out in the garden, my wife can't guilt trip me into it. She's just like, no, I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. Okay, great. Can you give me a ballpark idea of where most of these come around? I would hate for somebody to think, oh, I'm going to go do this, and they think I'm going to get away with it and do it for like $250. I'm guessing we're measuring this in thousands of dollars. Is that a fair number?
Oh, that's hard to say, because it depends on size. Again, if you're looking to just fix your soggy area in your backyard, you could probably do that for a few $100. But if this is part of a bigger project, and you're looking to, again, build an additional on your home, and you're hiring an engineer to get this done, we're probably looking at probably a few thousand
Okay.
to do it,
And I don't
just
want you to
because.
commit any more than that. We're not 10,000 though, but it's, don't call out and expect I'm going to have this thing installed probably for $300. That's where my head's
Right,
at anyway. You know,
right.
if you did it yourself, yeah, I agree with you. You might be able to get away with it with like materials if you're buying, I don't know how much
Yeah,
perennials cost right now.
bags of sand and
Yeah.
plants, and that's really it. But if you're doing a more grand scale rain garden because you have to, that's when you're looking to hire an excavator. There's going to be excavating charges, just because it could be a large feature.
Correct.
It can actually grow in size pretty large. Again, our PDF is more tilted towards just like a very small, more aesthetic thing, rather than like a hard engineered stormwater feature. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the principles may change, or the principles may stay the same, but the implementation and the requirements may change as you scale up. Like
Scale up.
and I think people appreciate that, but I wanted to point it out because I think some people are going to take this PDF and they're going to say, great, now I understand the major like things that are involved, so I can go take care of that wet spot that we've been irked about for years. Okay, yeah. If you want to go do it yourself, dig a hole, rebuild it the following way, go for it, have at it. You're doing an addition, don't mess around, make sure it's sized right and done right, and you're going to need the permits anyway. and you're hiring people to build the thing for you, you know.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think you and I are on the same page about that. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
Yeah, and two. Also, I wanted to mention we will actually do a site visit. So if anybody's interested, if anybody wants to build a rain garden on their own, or if actually I wouldn't say on their own, but if anybody's interested in installing a rain garden because they have issues with with drainage, or if there's a need to install a rain garden again because they're putting an addition or a home up, um, give us a call. We actually will make a site visit. It's free of charge. That's just the way we do it. We actually want to be out there on site. We want to see it firsthand. Again, it's free. After that, after I get back into my office, I'll put pen to paper. I'll figure out our engineering costs. But again, I just wanted to throw that out there. If anybody thinks that they have a need for a rain garden or anything else, we do free on-site consults to take a look at it, and we can give you the best advice, and then we put together a cost estimate.
Yep. And you should call, because this is why I call Stephen, and this is why I call everyone at All County and Associates, because they take care of me and they take care of my clients. So you should call them and take advantage of that. That's why they're there, to support you. And then it's done right, which is huge, because you do it wrong, you might just have a very expensive puddle now in your backyard.
Yes.
It's no fun either. Now, so somebody brought this up. They were talking about, I guess, matching programs and grant programs out in Seattle for managing stormwater. I know Texas went through a whole lot of problems with the storms that went through there. Philadelphia has their own issues. I'm not expecting you to say yes to this, but are there any programs that encourage local residents, or like tax write-offs or credits for installing stormwater systems on site?
To be honest with you, I do not know. I have not run into any at this point. I haven't even really had any of my clients ask that. So not that I am aware of.
Well, and that might not be, because I can tell you this particular scenario was brought up by a friend of mine who posted the question when I asked if anyone had any questions in advance of this. And he said, yeah, in Seattle, they're giving like an 80%, I guess, like a credit, or they're giving back to the residents for installing them, because they basically had so much problem with stormwater out there that they said, we can't dig up the roads. It's going to cost us millions upon millions. If we can give the money directly to the residents to try and absorb it on site, like you were referencing earlier, they were happy to, because it was cheaper for the state, and it still got the job done. Jason and I were chatting about it. Jason, for those who don't know, Jason's another guy at All County. He and I were chatting about some program down in Texas, and that's unrelated to the Texas that I was referencing, and how they were trying to do like some big government-based initiative, and there were like inefficiencies involved. Sometimes it's nice. But I wouldn't expect as much of that in Bucks, Montgomery, Berks, Lehigh, and Northampton counties. I view that more as like a Philadelphia, Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton kind of scenario. Because when you're in the city and the city can't handle the water, I mean, it's my understanding that when there's too much stormwater, the water just basically overflows into the river. So all the oil and the dirt and the garbage that's there just starts pouring into the river unfiltered. It doesn't go through, because soil filters the stuff as well and helps with the degradation. So nobody wants that. No. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. If there's anything else you want to highlight before we hop off, I'm going to encourage everybody to call you or email you directly. I'll put your contact information below, so they can follow up with you guys about rain gardens, because it's a good tool.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And as you said, if anybody has any questions or anything, just give me a call. Again, we will be more than happy to come out on your site and look at things and help you through your process.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephen.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Take care.
You too.